Welcome to Etc. So this is a webinar series that Cloud9 Conception started to essentially bring awareness to the hot topics that are in IVF. So of course, we're a fresh egg donor agency, but we want anyone who's going through fertility treatment to be able to come here, watch videos, see experts that work in the field who can guide them through certain aspects of their treatment. Also, parenthood, of course, and anything that you deal with that comes after the pregnancy and delivery of a baby through IVF. So we'll start and let you introduce yourself and talk
Okay.
about Sunray because, of course, that's super exciting. But you are an attorney that works in assisted reproductive technology.
That's
Yeah,
correct.
so tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm so happy to be here. So I'm Rijon Charne. I am the founding attorney of Sunray Fertility Law, and we specialize in everything to do with third-party assisted reproduction. So egg donation, sperm donation, surrogacy, embryo donation, anything that has to do with a third party, we specialize in, and my whole team is just trained on that. Yeah.
Awesome.
So we're licensed nationwide. We work from the West Coast to the East Coast and down the middle is kind of what I say. And so that provides a really great, that provides a really great background for us because we deal with so many states. So we understand the laws in each state and how the nuances per each state, right, makes a difference. And that's really key to take into account because a lot of the times, right, Shelby, people are not always based in the same state, right? The
Right.
donors usually based somewhere else. The intended parents are usually based somewhere else. And sometimes the clinic is in neither of the states that the
Yep.
intended parent or the donor are in. And so how do you kind of play that jurisdictional game is what I call it, to figure out which is actually the best choice of law provision to put into agreements.
Yeah, 100%. So the majority of our cases at Cloud9 are not where the recipient and donor live in the same state. It is almost always cross states.
Mhm.
And so what is your rule of thumb when it comes to circumstances like that and finding the right person to represent each party? Are you kind of in the mindset of choose an attorney who's in your state? Are you choose an attorney who's in the state of the clinic? What is your advice on that?
So for intended parents, I usually say choose an attorney you're comfortable with because a lot
Mhm.
of the times, right, with you can create jurisdiction from a variety of different aspects. You can create it from where the intended parents are, where the donor is, or sometimes depending on the state where the clinic is or where the retrieval is going to happen because that creates a nexus right to that
Yeah.
state. And so really when it comes down to the jurisdictional game, I really look at it from a legal perspective of which law will potentially protect you the most, right? And to what degree and to the level, to the highest level possible to ensure, right, that like you're going to be protected and covered when we're drafting it. So there are a lot of states that don't have any jurisdiction, right? They have no statute law, they have nothing. They don't even have case precedent, some of them,
Hmm.
right? And so it's like, well, what kind of law then do you put into the agreement, right?
Right.
And so it's really just figuring out which is the best route. So, take a case, for example, Shelby, where you've got like donors in California, intended parents are in Texas, right? And
Hmm.
so when you look at a situation like that, it's like, okay, we have California, which has a very, very, very friendly, right, very
Yep.
clear family building statute. And we
Mhm.
have Texas, which has like one sentence about the donor, which says that the donor will
Mm.
never be considered to be the legal parent. So we can technically use both of those. But in
Right.
my opinion, in a situation like that, I'd recommend we use California because by applying California law, it opens the intended parents up to much more liberal backing, right? Whereas Texas could potentially change the law, right? If they
Mhm.
don't like something or they want to make a ruling on embryos or something like that. And so from a jurisdictional game, even though they both have statutory law, I would prefer California to be implemented. And so that's the kind of like things I think through as an attorney to be like, which would actually benefit the clients the most.
Perfect. That's awesome. And then, so one of the things that we tell intended parents, and we are Cloud9 Conception's a fresh egg donor agency. So we're really the person who's in the center of all these moving pieces that's helping the intended parent and the donor navigate this journey that will hopefully lead to baby. And I always say, I'm referring you to the experts.
Mhm.
But when I give the summary of what someone can expect when they're looking for an attorney or they're reaching out to people who I've recommended to them, is that the legal contract is essentially a way to lock in parental rights.
Mhm.
It also goes over the compensation package for the egg donor. It goes over how many treatment cycles she's committing to going through, how long that will last.
Mhm.
Can you give it a little bit more in-depth details on what someone can expect from that?
Yeah, absolutely. So number one, I get this question all the time. Well, don't you start with a template? Of course we start with a template, right?
Hmm.
If I
Hmm.
said that I was rewriting 25 pages each and every time, that would be crazy, right?
Yeah.
However, to me, every single person's journey is different. Every intended parent wants something different. Every donor wants something different. I'll never forget. I had an attorney. She just started with me and she sat on three intended parent donor calls, right? And she's like, oh, but at the end of this day, after sitting on three calls, I'll have a really good idea, right,
Uh-huh.
about like what that's going to look
Yeah.
like. And at the end of the day, she was like, oh my God, that was like
Uh-huh.
three of the most different things, right? And I don't understand. And it's obvious because everybody has different wants and needs. And,
Mhm.
especially when it comes to building a family. So to me, it's very, very important that even though we start with a template, to customize that and to really speak and understand what the intended parents want or what the donor wants, and to have that included into the agreement is key for me. And
Mhm.
one of the things I think parents or parties have difficulty understanding is that if something is not in the agreement, you might as well assume that it does not exist, right? So
Yeah.
that's always where I begin. If you want her to not eat pork, so we had Indian clients, for example, they were very religious. They were like, we do not want her to eat pork during the retrieval. Okay, fine.
Mhm. Mhm.
They're like, should we put that in? Or should we just tell her? And I was like, nope, that
You put
needs to
that
go in
in. Yeah.
there and she needs
Mhm.
to agree to that. And so, the contracts themselves are incredibly important because what we want to establish with a legal agreement is that if something happens in the future, and an example I always give is maybe the egg donor doesn't want her own kids today, or she, understands that like she's fine or she's of the mindset, I'm donating my eggs. I don't care. I'm
Mhm.
fine.
Mhm.
You can do whatever you want with the embryos.
Mhm.
What happens if 5 years from now she tries to have children and she can't, right?
Mhm.
Or,
Mhm. Mhm.
whatever it may be. Then at that point, maybe, possibly, she may come off to the intended parents and say, hey, I want my eggs back. Well, if you don't have a contract in place, a black and white agreement in place, are you going to then have to go to
Mhm.
court and try and explain to the judge what the donor's intent was back 5 years before?
Mhm.
Really? That's not a position anybody wants to be in.
Yeah.
So, when it comes to the agreement, right, one of the big things is how do we establish parentage rights to ensure that those parentage rights are 100% like, solidified in exactly the manner that they need to be solidified? That any eggs retrieved are the complete and total ownership of the intended parents.
Yeah.
Any embryos and any children created from those eggs are the intended parents, and the donor will never have a say over the eggs, the embryos, or the children that have been born from those embryos. And that way, if in 5 years the donor decides to change her mind, we have a black and white agreement to say to the judge, hey, not only is her intent clear, she also had an attorney who reviewed it with her. And as
Mhm.
a result of that, nobody can ever question if she wasn't of her sound mind in order
Right.
to undergo the donation.
Right. Yeah, so important. The especially, I mean, I don't want to say especially, but especially for the intended parents, right? Like this is an extremely, I recommend this whether or not your clinic is requiring it or not. And unfortunately, a
100%.
lot of clinics that don't require it don't educate on it. And it's hard if you're an intended parent and you're going through treatment and you're already having sticker shock from the cost of just using donor eggs, you're typically not going to tack on extra stuff that your clinic's not advocating for. But this
Right.
is something like I can't stress it enough. It is so important to have a legal contract and it protects the donors too, just as much as it does the parents. So not
100%.
having parental rights to any children that are born in the future, ensuring that the compensation is written out properly.
Mhm.
Um, Also, and this is a question I have for you as well, because I know the,
Yeah.
the verbiage has changed a little bit and the circumstances are changing with the internet.
Mhm.
What is what can be written in a legal contract that outlines whether or not a donor is open to being contacted in the future?
Yeah. So when I draft the agreement, I always have a consult with the intended parents to understand what exactly it is that they envision in regards to what we call future contact, right? Around them and the donor and their child who is not yet existing in this world, right?
Yeah.
And so how do we try and think of all the circumstances, but it would never be possible to cover all of the circumstances. And so
Right.
how do we really like put that into the agreement and make sure that like it's correctly done? And so when it comes to determining the level of openness, right, between the intended parents and the donor, I always say that the intended parents can start with it. If some, some agencies are very, very good at like really getting deep into exactly what that future contact is supposed to look like, etc. And
Yeah.
some agencies are like, oh, the donor said should be open.
Yeah.
Okay, what does
Mm-hmm.
that mean? Exchange
Mm-hmm.
a full name, phone
Mm-hmm.
number, email, anonymous email,
Mm-hmm.
when upon embryo creation, upon the retrieval, upon live birth. Like when is
Mm-hmm.
open considered to occur?
And how open? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so when I meet with the IPs, I say to them, if you could wave a magic wand, what would that openness and future contact look like for you? Right.
Mhm.
Then, based on what they say, we draft that agreement to really very explicitly, list out what they would envision for
Okay.
open communication. But then, right above and beyond that, I always tell them there's no guarantee that the donor is going to accept this. However, it definitely allows for a baseline, and then we can see what the donor is and is not comfortable with. And 90% of the time, the donor is usually comfortable with what the intended parents are requesting.
Oh yeah, and I know I can only speak for Cloud9, but I've worked in the industry for a while, and the majority of agencies that I'm familiar with, they do those conversations like, "Hey, this is not how it used to be, where you could just be
Mhm.
anonymous and
Correct.
you might not ever run into future offspring." Like, it's not like that anymore.
Not.
And also, what we have noticed is an uptick in a requirement for donor sibling registry on legal agreements. Is that something that you guys also put in place, or have you seen that?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely put the donor sibling registry in place,
Okay.
100%. And one of the things about the donor sibling registry is I think it's important if you're not going to have full openness. So, you know, if I take a step back and I say, okay, what do I see most of my clients requesting or wanting now, right? They really say, hey, you know what? We would like to exchange full name, full email, and phone number upon live birth of child. That is what most of my parents choose. Why? Because they understand that there will be a live child in this world at that time. And at that time, they are comfortable exchanging contact information with technically a stranger,
Uh,
right?
mhm.
If somebody is not comfortable with doing it upon live birth, but instead want to do it upon the child turning 18
Mhm.
or when the child starts to ask questions, if the child starts to ask questions, that's really where we see the donor sibling registry or a registry similar kick in. Because at that point, there is no guarantee that the agency is going to be around in 10 years from now, or the clinic is going to be around in 10 years from now, or the attorneys, right? And so, how do we create some aspect of safety for the clients, right?
Right.
And the donor sibling registry does that. And I think that there's nuances to when you should set that up and all of that stuff to get that safety around it. But yeah.
Yeah, I think the donor sibling registry is a great resource.
Hmm.
And a lot of the donors that I see do say, like, I'm comfortable once a child reaches 18. And I'm always reminding them, look, this is a contract between you and the intended parents. This is not a
Correct.
legal agreement between you and that child. So
Correct.
you don't know whether I mean, if that child on their own begins a search for you before they're the age of 8, these are all things that you have to consider. That binding agreement does not involve the child, where this took place before they were even conceived.
Correct.
So yeah, super, super important. Donor sibling registry is great. I love to plug them because I just think they're a
They
good
are. They're
platform.
great. It's a really smart
Yes.
program. It really
Yes.
is.
And
And I think it's cool because it serves a secondary purpose too, right? It allows
mhm.
donor conceived children to be able to connect with other donor conceived
Yep.
children as well, which is amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. No, super important. So I love that the legal agreements are covering that and making sure that everybody's comfortable. And then also, just for anybody who's watching this, the intended parents and the donors do have separate representation. So we treat it as you would for most legal contracts, where you
Mhm.
have to have someone where there's not a conflict of interest, right? So, and intended parents sometimes get a little bit confused with that. Well, if this is going for our wishes and our treatment, then why is there I don't want to say third party because God, there's like 10 parties, but why is there another party involved? And we just want to make sure that everyone's comfortable and that the egg donor is comfortable and not feeling coerced or anything like that. So, yeah, very,
Well,
very.
it also goes back to intent, right? That
Mm-hmm.
if there is ever a challenge based on parentage rights or something like that, you can say that the donor was equally represented. Because
Yeah.
technically, right, when you are an attorney, you have to look at who is the weaker party. When I say weaker, that's not like, oh, they're a weak person or anything like that. It's that, the intended parents technically, when you look at it from an outside perspective, have more strength, right? They
Mm-hmm.
are the ones paying the donor. They are requiring certain things from the donor. They have higher expectations of the donor. The donor is providing, an incredible thing to the intended parents, but she doesn't have as much power in a sense as the intended parents do. And so when we look at cases like this, right, whether it's a donation or whether it's in a contract case or anything like that, it's like, okay, how can we show that the person who is the weaker party, right, actually was clearly and accurately represented so that they
Mm-hmm.
went from a weaker party to an equal party,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that is where opposing counsel comes in because then the donor really feels comfortable. She's had her rights explained to her and all of that. You know, I get this question a lot of like, should we have an attorney? Can an attorney represent both sides, et cetera, et cetera? And the way I kind of explain it, it's a bit of a strange analogy, but
Mm-hmm.
I think it provides a clear understanding into ownership and how things work. So I always give this example of a car. Okay. So Shelby, you want to buy a car from me, okay?
Of
If
course.
I go ahead and I sell you my car and you
Mhm.
pay me for my car, by law, technically, I have sold you that car. However, if I do not accurately transfer the title of my car to
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
and you have an
Mhm.
accident, you can
Mhm.
come to me and your insurance can come to me and say, hey, you're actually the legal owner of that car still.
Mhm.
You know,
Mhm.
you need to pay for the bumper bashing that Shelby had. But wait, I paid. She paid me for the car. It's no longer mine. Actually, technically, under title and like ownership, it is.
Yeah.
If I go ahead and I transfer that title to you and you have a bumper bashing, you have no option to come back to me and say, hey, I need you to pay for my bumper. So eggs and assisted reproduction is similar because when those eggs are retrieved from the donor, we want to make sure that under all legal
Mhm.
purposes,
Mhm.
that title and the ownership of those eggs have been transferred to the intended parents
Yep.
so that in the case of a bumper bashing, right, nobody can go back to the donor and the donor can't go back to the intended parents to be like, hey, that ownership, I belong to that estate. I should be getting money from that estate, right? And so that's why legal and parentage and ownership is so important to have written down.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And it just continues to speak towards, even if it's not a requirement, that doesn't mean it's not necessary. And
100%.
the thing that we hear a lot, or, I worked in a clinic setting for a long time. And one of the things that we would hear a lot after children had been born or like a few years down the line is sometimes we would get phone calls from third party patients who now have built their families, and they're confused as to why there wasn't a legal contract put in place from the gate. And it's like, yeah, these are things that you should really think about doing, even if the clinic does not require it. So that's something where I hope that it moves towards the idea of, hey, let's make this something where everyone who's walking through our doors getting that treatment knows this is recommended. But a lot of times, if it's not a requirement, people aren't doing it.
Yeah.
So the way that you described it with the transfer of title, like that's chef's kiss, perfect. And then I do think you're right when you're talking about kind of the levels of the parties that you're working with in a legal contract. Oftentimes women are in their 20s when they're donating. They've never even talked to an attorney who's representing
Right.
them before. So that already can feel intimidating. Then
100%.
yeah, then you link it in with this fact that this person is going to be taking hormones and there's a procedure involved. And this is not something as simple as like buying a home or, XYZ. You're going through the situation. It's got long-term impact on your life, on the life of the intended parents, and having a legal contract in place really solidifies the plan moving forward. So yes, especially for intended parents, but definitely for egg donors too. Um,
100%.
and a lot of the attorneys that work specifically with assisted reproduction reproductive technology, excuse me, are so they work so well with the egg donors. Like this is typically not something where they're feeling super once I'm like, it's just a phone call. You answer the
Mhm.
phone, talk to your people, see how it feels. Like it sounds so intimidating, but
It
this
does.
is really good for you. And it gives you a chance to even better understand it from where you are at this point before that call.
Absolutely. Like that's spot on. And it's like, a lot of the time I'll get, but it's going to be a big deal and it's going to take up so much time. I'm like, actually, it will
Worth
take
it.
maybe 30 to 45 minutes of this entire thing. And for
Hmm.
the rest of your life, you'll never have to worry about it.
Yep.
There's a guy named the Sperminator, right?
Hmm.
He has
Hmm.
donated his sperm. I don't even know
Woo!
how many times at this point,
Hmm.
right? And he's got, the last time I checked, I think he was nearing 100 children or something. And some people have contracts with him and some
Hmm.
people don't. And the people that do not have contracts with him can technically sue him for child support,
Yeah.
right? And so when
Yeah.
you're talking about protection of the donor, nothing is technically stopping the intended parents, right, from technically coming after the donor for child support, right?
Hmm.
Because
Hmm.
again, there is no legal agreement in place showing intent, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I always say that I think that if anybody does donation and they really do not implement any sort of legal agreement, whatever that looks like, they're really setting themselves up for a example case. And I don't think
Hmm.
anybody would want to be an example case when it comes to a child.
And how frequently we counsel our donors to essentially expect that at some point there's going to be a communication line between you and future, children who are born from this donation. How often, or do you ever get egg donors who are like, I want to end my contract that this is for me completely non-disclosed until the end of time. Do you see that?
We do, absolutely.
Mhm.
It's definitely more rare now. Like when I
Mhm.
first started my career in this industry, that was what was commonplace, right?
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
things have obviously changed now. I would say majority of my donors and intended parents are open to some level of degree, whatever that looks like. I would probably say it's 50-50 divided between upon live birth and upon a time when the child starts to ask questions.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
I would say that maybe 5 to 10% of cases are hard no. And usually the hard no is actually coming from the intended parent. And it's usually from
Hmm.
an intended parent who is embarrassed or ashamed that they have to go through donation,
Yeah.
or, it's a certain religion or something like that, that where this is like such horror, right? That like they don't want anybody to ever talk about it or know about it. And they're actually
Yeah.
choosing to not even disclose that the child was born from a donor, which I think has significant problems. And I tell
Hmm.
intended parents about that, especially with DNA testing and these ancestral websites. And,
Right.
one of the things we have to think about is this is today. Look at what's happening with AI and how technology is like
Whew.
flying at a speed that like,
Yes.
I can't even comprehend it. I consider myself, a techie, but
Hmm.
um, we have to think that, based on this, we're talking 10 to 15 years from now, right? Like, what is the world going to look
Yeah.
like at that point? And are you ready for the outcomes of your child if you've never disclosed that to them?
Right.
Because they will
Right.
most likely find out.
Right. And we're already so advanced with it. Like the 23andMe situation where
Oh,
you could
yeah.
hop on Facebook and it'd say,
Oh, yeah.
oh, we think this is your second cousin. Like
Hmm.
that is already beyond the scope of what a lot of people ever expected. So,
Absolutely.
and it's just going to keep going, 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 going. That's not going to get, and I mean, fertility in a lot of ways, the study of this medicine has moved that forward. So
Oh,
it's like, it's really hard to balance those two things if you're like, I am not comfortable with this, but also I want to use this over here to expand my family. That is one thing that there's always the debate when someone's first told they need donor egg or a same-sex couple who already knows they're going to need donor egg
mhm.
is do we pursue frozen or fresh? That's something that we talk about a lot across all different webinars on our website with intended parents, counseling through that. And one thing that I do tell people is if you want the spectrum of disclosure is vast and grand. And if you want to be able to fine tune that to your liking, a fresh egg donor is going to have a legal contract in real time. So versus frozen donors who have it done during their retrieval, which could have been 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So
Absolutely.
that's another thing that we try to let people know a lot, especially if they're, I'm not sure or this or that. And also the one thing that I have seen in some contracts is they will actually put in with the parameters for the egg donor the amount of retrievals that that donor is allowed to have. So I've seen this a couple times. Was not just like a one-off for me, but we do know that standard society is that a woman should not be having more than 6 egg donations in her
Right.
lifetime. But we have seen some contracts come through that say like, no, I only want there to be a few donations,
Mhm.
and she's going to agree to this so that we don't have like an overpopulation of biologically related children.
Mhm.
I do think that that can be beneficial as well in
Mhm.
a contract. Not saying that they should be agreeing to do like 1 or 2. You should have autonomy as an egg donor. If you want to do up to 6, that's something that's a standard that's been set by people who know what they're talking about, right?
Right.
So, I think that's great if someone wants to donate up to 6 times. But also considering that if you go a frozen route, 1, you typically do not get to cap it that way. And
Okay.
2, when they do a donation, those are divvied up into cohorts that go to different people.
Mhm. Mhm.
So how has that have you seen that come across your desk, or is that something that you're like, yeah, we can write this in and we can limit the amount of donations that are taking place?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you can do anything you want, right?
Mhm,
But
mhm,
when you limit donations, right, you have to, you said it earlier, Shelby, that the donor has autonomy, right, to
mhm,
determine what she wants to do.
mhm,
So let's say intended parents say, okay, she's donated twice before. I don't want her to donate, and this will be her third, right, for
mhm,
us.
mhm.
I don't want her to donate another 3. Okay, but how do you then make that fair, right?
Mhm,
Because
mhm, mhm.
technically the donor could donate another 3 times. And if we're paying her $12,000 a cycle or however much she's going to get, right, that becomes like $36,000 that technically, right, she could have
Yeah,
earned
yeah.
without your restriction on it. So,
Mhm.
in order to make it balanced and fair, right, then the intended parent should technically pay her out for exclusivity, right? And this is very, very
Interesting. Yeah.
common, right? This is
Mhm,
very common in
mhm.
just the world of contracts, right? If you're entering into an agreement to buy a company, right, in order to make due diligence and to check that everything is correct, you're
Mhm,
going to enter
mhm.
into a period of exclusivity. And in return, right, you have to pay the company a certain amount of money in order to let them hold you, right,
Right.
and hold that exclusivity. And so that is the exact same concept. And so, yes, I've definitely done exclusivity agreements before in that perspective, but it's
Yeah.
definitely something that the intended parents have to understand, because I do have clients who are like, okay, can we just prevent her from, um, can we just prevent her from donating in the future? I'm like, not really, right? It's
Mhm,
her
mhm,
body, it's her eggs.
mhm.
She can do what she wants with them. But there is a way to do it. And we discussed
Yeah.
that. Mhm.
Yeah, I love that, and I think that that's ethical too. So,
Absolutely.
coming to an agreement where the donor is comfortable and is
Mhm.
okay with it, and the intended parents are comfortable, and they feel like they're not entering into something where their biological children are gonna have, like you said, the sperm guy, okay?
Yeah,
Siblings all over the place, living in the same
all of
town
it.
as them, in the
Yeah.
same classroom as them. I mean, I think that's very fair, and there is a lot of pushback sometimes from people who are entering the world of fertility of why isn't this even more regulated? Why isn't this
Right.
even more regulated? So if that is a concern that you have, a legal agreement is a great way for you to take the reins
Mhm.
in a field that might not be as regulated as you find
Mhm.
to be
Exactly.
comfortable. So
Absolutely.
this is one thing that you can absolutely do. You can go to the drawing board and be completely honest. Feeling comfortable with your attorney, like you said, of course, is so important.
Mhm.
And the majority of people that work in assisted reproductive technology have some kind of experience in this field on their own.
Mhm.
So I think that also matters too. And I also want to kind of pick your brain on this too. I always tell people the importance of choosing an attorney that specializes in assisted reproductive technology. And can you explain a little bit why that's so important? Because I've literally had estate attorneys reach out, like, I'm going to be representing I'm like,
Nope.
this is, yeah, that's a corner you do not want to cut. That is the corner you do not
Nope.
want to cut.
No. So I've had clients themselves who are attorneys, and I'm like, we're going to represent ourselves, and I was like, that's fine, but I'm not going to work with you, right? And so
Yeah.
when for some reason, people look at lawyers as all lawyers are the same,
Right.
okay?
Mm-hmm.
But if you look at doctors, right? a regular like family practitioner is
Uh-huh.
definitely not the same as a cardiologist or a
Right.
neurosurgeon, right?
Mm-hmm.
So would you want a general family doctor performing heart surgery on you?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Probably not is going
Mm-hmm.
to be my guess, right? For law, it's the same thing. Like, I am a lawyer. Can I look at a business contract and like understand the basics of it? Of course I can,
Yeah.
obviously, right?
Yeah.
Can I
Yeah.
probably notice a thing or two that I would like to have added or edited or, change it up? Absolutely. However, when I'm not seeing it day in and day out, I am 100% going to miss holes. I'm going to miss
Yeah.
vital information. And I don't believe that I would be able to represent my client at the highest level of what they should be represented at. And to me, that's the exact same thing. Estate planning attorneys, in your example, an estate planning attorney, it's a wonderful attorney, right? Like, but they will not know what should be or should not be included in the agreement.
Right.
Or on the flip side, right? I've had a client who was a litigator and he wanted to represent himself. He threw things into the agreement, right?
Mhm.
Because I wouldn't represent him from that perspective. And then he decided he would have me, but he was going to rule the
Got it.
process.
Uh-huh.
And
Uh-huh.
he
Uh-huh.
threw things into the agreement that was so litigation heavy, right? I
Mm.
told him that if you decide to put this through, the donor's going to freak out because she's going to think you're probably going to come after and litigate her, right? For whatever thing you could even come up with, and she's
Right.
probably going to pull out. And he was like, "Don't be ridiculous. This isn't even tough." I was like, "Okay." And exactly
Yeah.
as predicted, the donor pulled out
Mm.
and he was really upset about it. And the next legal we did, he sat back and he was like, "You just tell me what to do." But I think that that's really such a such a like hands-on kind of like understanding of like
Yeah.
why you don't
Yeah.
want somebody who doesn't understand what they're doing in there, because it can either break a match or not protect you and can have really serious consequences in the future.
Yeah, and having a competent lawyer who's in a different specified field that understands the legal terminology, that's not equivalent to
No,
expertise. So it's
absolutely
not, I'm not trying to offend you when you say that your brother-in-law is going to
correct.
cut you a good deal and he's going to, that is just not, you've really, this is one of the most important parts of the process. Do yourself the favor,
Hmm.
invest in someone who understands all the
Correct.
laws.
Correct.
Um, yeah, yeah. No, thank you for that because
Yeah.
yeah, I try to explain it to people and I'm like, I know you think that I'm just in like this web of people
No.
and we're all like patting each other on the back, but this is really important. Like I really need
Yeah.
you to choose someone who knows who understands this and can talk to you about it and give you a solid legal agreement.
Correct. 100%. I mean, absolutely, without question. And I mean, Shelby, I've been in this space now for a very long time. And,
Mhm.
I'll see other attorneys' agreements who have, like, in our space, right? And, like, they, like, haven't been updated for a really long time,
Yeah.
or, like, they're
Yeah.
still okay
Yeah.
using the agreements from, like, 15 years ago. And it's
Yeah.
like, I think it's really, really important for intended parents to really understand who they're working with and why they're working with that person. How often is the contract updated? What edits are there, etc. Just so that you can also make sure that you're getting the best representation, right, of this industry, to ensure that, like, everything is tied with a golden bow, right?
Mhm,
So,
mhm. The reference to the MD was great because that's understandable for the
yeah.
population we work in. I mean, you're not going to your primary care provider for an egg retrieval.
No, no.
So explaining that in that way is great and gives
Yeah.
a lot of perspective. So thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
So tell us about the timing. So once someone's referred to you, what does it look like to complete that
Yeah.
agreement?
So at my firm, we have some of the quickest turnaround times in the industry. So from the time we get all of the like terms from the agency in order
Yeah.
to be able to draft the agreement, and the intended parents have signed the retainer agreement and all of that sort of stuff, we get the first draft out within like 3 business days, give or
Well,
take.
okay.
So, from a delay perspective, there really isn't, and in that aspect of things. And when clients ask me like, okay, how long can you expect the whole legal process to take? Because we really want to get moving and this has been a long process, right? And all
Mhm,
that sort of stuff. I tell
mhm,
them it's between 2 to 4 weeks, right? And that's a standard timing process because I always say to them, if it takes you a day to review the agreement, fantastic. Like,
Right.
awesome, that's a day.
Hmm.
But if it takes you a week to review it because you're busy and you have a life, right? Like, that's fine too. But that's going to be a week of time. And it goes to the same with the donor and the donor's attorney.
Yep.
And so
Yep.
that, 2 to 4 week process, right, really comes into play. We've had contracts that are completed from beginning to end within like 7 days, 5 days, right? It just really
Mhm.
depends on how quickly everybody decides to move and can move.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's great. That is typically the time that we would expect as well. So
Yeah.
I always tell people average is 3 weeks. So that
Yeah.
sounds great. That's exactly where you're
Mhm.
at.
Yeah.
But I love that you have a set time. 3 days is a solid
Mhm.
turnaround time for that initial draft. So yeah, that's awesome. And then do you guys have initial consults when someone reaches out to you?
Absolutely. So the way that
Okay.
Sunray works is we offer a free consult. So anybody who wants to have a consult can have a consult with us. And then what happens is after that, once they've decided to move forward with us, we do everything electronically. My firm is completely remote. We have, the reason for that is to have the best people, right, that we can
Okay.
have around the world and the United States. And so we go ahead, we send the retainer electronically, they sign it, we send the invoice electronically, they pay it, or through escrow. And then we get all the terms and stuff from the agency, we draft the agreement, and we send that agreement off to the intended parents. We do something different than other firms because I understand how overwhelming receiving a 25-page agreement, right, can
Yes.
be, especially if you're not a lawyer. And so
Hmm.
we have structured this like program almost where certain sections are really emphasized, comments are down the side, so that as clients are reading through it, right, they're getting an understanding not from a legal perspective, but from a human perspective of like,
Sure.
hey, I need you to focus on this. This is important. Do you have questions about this?
Hmm.
This is
Hmm.
what this means. This is what a lot of clients ask us regarding this section. Let me break this down for you so that they can really understand it. Then, if they want to set up a call with us, more than welcome. If they're like, actually, this is pretty straightforward, we just have a couple changes that we want to deal with via email, completely fine. Again,
Okay.
I do not impose anything on clients because every client is different and
Hmm.
every client wants something different that makes them happy. And so I rather open the floor to them for them to tell me what they want versus me imposing it on
Right.
them.
That's awesome. Yeah. And it's crazy. We're used to remote work now because
Yeah.
COVID was insane. But
Yep.
it is awesome that you guys have the ability to have people all around. It used to not be like that. Like you used to find an attorney who was licensed in their state and maybe a couple of surrounding states if you were lucky. And now
Correct.
we're seeing, yeah, a much more bigger scope when it comes to that. So awesome. So 2 to 4 weeks, usually what you're looking at. That
Yep.
sounds great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool.
And then
And
for
then
the signing of it, we send that electronically as well. And if it needs to be notarized, we have a notary on staff. So she can sign everything there too. Yeah.
love that.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. And then yes, I do want to talk about disposition because that is one thing that we counsel our donors on as
Mhm.
well.
Mhm.
So it's interesting with each case that we go into. It's so very different with what the preferences are, but we definitely do have donors who want to feel very connected to their recipients and do not want this to be like a free for all donation. So
Mhm.
we have had multiple contracts where the donors have said, look, this is a donation for you. And in the future, if you were to have unused embryos, I don't consent to you donating those, in a secondary way,
Mhm.
among other things. So what are some scenarios that you've seen?
Yeah. So when it comes to disposition, unless it is very, very, very strongly decided between the parties, right, which is usually it's not, we representing the intended parents draft it as openly as possible, right?
Yep.
That in the case that they have any eggs or embryos remaining after they have completed their family, so their family is completely done, they do not want any more children, like signed, sealed, and delivered. What do? They don't want to continue to pay for the storage fees because we know that that's increasing every year and it's getting more and more. And so, from that perspective, right, what I tell them is, why don't we have it that once your family's completed, right, that you have the right to discard them, right,
Yep.
or to thaw them. You have the right to donate them to science, or
Hmm.
you have the right to donate them to another person or couple.
Hmm.
Okay.
Hmm.
Mm, I'd say maybe 80% of the time we'll see a change on that
Yeah.
from the donor where she will say exactly what you said, Shelby. Like, hey, look, I'm fine with you thawing any remaining eggs or embryos because remember, those eggs are fertilized most of the time with
Right.
the party sperm, right? With the intended
Yep.
father's sperm. And so it's like they don't want their embryos out into the distance either, unless they're wanting to be embryo donors, right? So it's like,
Hmm.
okay. But We'll see the change from the donor where she'll say, like, I do not want you donating any unused eggs or embryos to any person or to science. You can only destroy them. Or we'll see that I don't want you to donate them to any person unless you get my permission. So it's like, hey, you got to get my green light in order to be able to donate. And if you don't get my green light, then you're not able to donate.
Right.
And I think that's a pretty fair and reasonable,
Oh
like,
yeah.
middle
Yeah.
ground, right? So we'll see a lot of those changes. And I'd probably say 80% of donors make that change.
Yeah. And I mean, we could literally talk for 8 hours about all the
100%.
different scenarios that you've seen, but it is not to make your job harder, but you can really make the contract as unique as you want it. I had a donor who donated to it was a gay male, but he was single.
Mhm.
And she did an egg retrieval cycle, and he took a portion of those and fertilized with his own sperm and saved the rest for the idea that down the line, when he was in a relationship, that partner would fertilize the rest. And so she was able to make it super clear in her contract. She was like, look, I'm okay with that, but I'm only okay with that secondary donation if this person is planning to co-parent with you. I'm donating to you. So there's really so much that you can do, and each situation can feel so unique. So yeah, you're just going to be rolling with all kinds of stuff after this, but there is a lot of opportunity to customize it to how you want, and you're not going to find that in a consent form at a clinic. You're
No,
not going to find that in the business agreement with Cloud9. So the
no,
legal part, that is your way of really making it what you want it to be. And
100.
very rarely in life do we get to do that. So just
A
do it.
100%. A 100%. I mean, it's very rare in life that you get to really customize it and break it down to like what you really wanted to say, and a lot of parents, right? They'll come and they'll say, I've never done this before. I have no idea where even to begin.
Yeah.
And, I always say to them, don't be overwhelmed. We are the experts. We have done this
Mm-hmm.
thousands of times over. We know where to begin. And then, I really enjoy really diving deep with parents to understand, okay, this is actually what you want the contract to say. This is the message you want to get across, right? Okay, how does it sound if I word it like this? Does that work for you? Right? Oh yeah. No, not really. I prefer it this way. Okay. And then it becomes an open conversation, right? Which is why with your attorney, which is why having an attorney that you really like and trust is like the key to everything.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
And you're great. You're just
Oh,
such good energy. So, yeah, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
yeah.
Tell us where can we find you? So, Instagram, I don't even know if you have X. Like, I don't know. I can't keep up with this stuff.
Yeah.
Instagram, Facebook, like all the websites. Where can someone find you if they're
Yes.
interested in you representing them, or even if they're interested in picking your brain or reaching out and learning about Sunray?
Yeah.
Where can they find you?
Yeah. So of course they can always reach out to you. You got my info.
Yes. Yes.
But if not, we are on Instagram and TikTok under Sunray Fertility Law, which is the name of my firm. I named my firm Sunray Fertility because people always say that I was like my grandma and her name was Ray. And they always said that she was just a ray of sunshine, like wherever she
Yeah.
kind of went, and she was very bubbly and outgoing and warm. And I just always loved that. I never got to meet her, unfortunately. She passed away before I was ever born. And so when I was thinking about what to name my firm, I thought Sunray was like such a perfect fit because
Yeah.
it's like building a family really should feel like a warm ray of sunshine. Sometimes it's not, and sometimes it's very hard to get there. But we at Sunray try and do everything we can in our power as attorneys and as humans, right, to let the legal experience feel like a ray of sunshine versus it being,
Yeah.
like very cold and stoic and legal.
Mhm.
But a little bit about me, just so you know how I got into the industry. I'm actually a cancer survivor, and I was diagnosed with cancer just 2 days after graduating from law school. And I landed up freezing my eggs prior to undergoing chemo. And insurance wouldn't cover me. I was not medically necessary, as they very clearly like to tell me. And I was really mad, and I decided I wasn't going to let them get away with it. So after I finished chemo and radiation, I landed up studying for the California bar. I passed that. And while I was doing that, I landed up actually changing the law in Texas, which is where I received my cancer treatment.
Woo!
Yeah.
I know,
And
I'm like a mega fan. I watch your TED Talks.
oh,
I'm like, yeah,
thanks.
this girl knows what she's doing. She's got a little story to tell.
Thanks. So yeah, and I landed up now the insurance companies are required to cover fertility preservation for cancer patients. And so I love it because it was kind of like a stab back at the insurance
Yeah,
companies to be
I
like,
love
you
that.
messed with the wrong person.
Yeah, and taking some
So,
power back when you feel
yeah,
so, yeah, that, yeah.
powerless.
Well,
Yeah,
I'm so glad to hear
thanks.
that,
It's actually
your
my
past.
10-year anniversary this year
Yeah.
of being cancer free.
Oh
So
my gosh, congratulations. Yeah,
thank
that's
you.
so exciting. And thank you for everything that that impact on your life has changed the lives of so many people because
Yeah.
of, the journey that it took you on. So thank you.